Day 88. Judges 7-8. Early in the morning Jerubbaal, that is, Gideon, and all the men with him camped beside the spring of Harod. And the camp of Midian was north of them in the valley near the hill of Moreh. Then the Lord said to Gideon, You have too many people for me to deliver Midian into their hands, lest Israel glorify themselves over me, saying, My own hand has saved me. Now, therefore, proclaim in the hearing of the people, Whoever is fearful and trembling may turn back and leave Mount Gilead. So 22,000 of them turned back, but 10,000 remained. Then the Lord said to Gideon, There are still too many people. Take them down to the water, and I will sift them for you there. If I say to you, This one shall go with you, he shall go. But if I say, This one shall not go with you, he shall not go. So Gideon brought the people down to the water, and the Lord said to him, Separate those who lap the water with their tongues like a dog from those who kneel to drink. And the number of those who lapped the water with their hands to their mouths was 300 men, all the others knelt to drink. Then the Lord said to Gideon, With the 300 men who lapped the water I will save you and deliver the Midianites into your hand. But all the others are to go home. So Gideon sent the rest of the Israelites to their tents but kept the 300 men, who took charge of the provisions and ram's horns of the others. And the camp of Midian lay below him in the valley. That night the Lord said to Gideon, Get up and go down against the camp, for I have delivered it into your hand. But if you are afraid to do so, then go down to the camp with your servant Purah and listen to what they are saying. Then your hands will be strengthened to attack the camp. So he went with Purah his servant to the outposts where armed men were guarding the camp. Now the Midianites, Amalekites, and all the other people of the east had settled in the valley like a swarm of locusts, and their camels were as countless as the sand on the seashore. And as Gideon arrived, a man was telling his friend about a dream. Behold, I had a dream, he said, and I saw a loaf of barley bread come tumbling into the Midianite camp. It struck the tent so hard that the tent overturned and collapsed. His friend replied, This is nothing less than the sword of Gideon son of Joash, the Israelite. God has delivered Midian and the whole camp into his hand. When Gideon heard the dream and its interpretation, he bowed in worship. He returned to the camp of Israel and said, Get up, for the Lord has delivered the camp of Midian into your hand. And he divided the 300 men into 3 companies and gave each man a ram's horn in one hand and a large jar in the other, containing a torch. Watch me and do as I do, Gideon said. When I come to the outskirts of the camp, do exactly as I do. When I and all who are with me blow our horns, then you are also to blow your horns from all around the camp and shout, For the Lord and for Gideon. Gideon and the 100 men with him reached the outskirts of the camp at the beginning of the middle watch, just after the changing of the guard. They blew their horns and broke the jars that were in their hands. The 3 companies blew their horns and shattered their jars. Holding the torches in their left hands and the horns in their right hands, they shouted, A sword for the Lord and for Gideon. Each Israelite took his position around the camp, and the entire Midianite army fled, crying out as they ran. And when the 300 ram's horns sounded, the Lord set all the men in the camp against one another with their swords. The army fled to Beth-shittah toward Zererah as far as the border of Abel-meholah near Tabbath. Then the men of Israel were called out from Naphtali, Asher, and all Manasseh, and they pursued the Midianites. Gideon sent messengers throughout the hill country of Ephraim to say, Come down against the Midianites and seize the waters of the Jordan ahead of them as far as Beth-barah. So all the men of Ephraim were called out, and they captured the waters of the Jordan as far as Beth-barah. They also captured Oreb and Zeeb, the 2 princes of Midian, and they killed Oreb at the rock of Oreb and Zeeb at the winepress of Zeeb. So they pursued the Midianites and brought the heads of Oreb and Zeeb to Gideon on the other side of the Jordan. Then the men of Ephraim said to Gideon, Why have you done this to us? Why did you fail to call us when you went to fight against Midian? And they contended with him violently. But Gideon answered them, Now what have I accomplished compared to you? Are not the gleanings of Ephraim better than the grape harvest of Abiezer? God has delivered Oreb and Zeeb, the 2 princes of Midian, into your hand. What was I able to do compared to you? When he had said this, their anger against him subsided. Then Gideon and his 300 men came to the Jordan and crossed it, exhausted yet still in pursuit. So Gideon said to the men of Sukkah, Please give my troops some bread, for they are exhausted, and I am still pursuing Zebah and Zalmunna, the kings of Midian. But the leaders of Sukkah asked, Are the hands of Zebah and Zalmunna already in your possession, that we should give bread to your army? Very well, Gideon replied, "When the Lord has delivered Zebah and Zalmunna into my hand, I will tear your flesh with the thorns and briars of the wilderness." From there he went up to Penuel and asked the same from them, but the men of Penuel gave the same response as the men of Sukkah. So Gideon told the men of Penuel, "When I return in triumph, I will tear down this tower." Now Zebah and Zalmunna were in Karkor with their army of about 15,000 men, all that were left of the armies of the people of the east. 120,000 swordsmen had already fallen. And Gideon went up by way of the caravan route east of Nobah and Jogbehah, and he attacked their army, taking them by surprise. When Zebah and Zalmunna fled, Gideon pursued and captured these two kings of Midian, routing their entire army. After this, Gideon son of Joash returned from the battle along the ascent of Heres. There he captured a young man of Sukkah and interrogated him. The young man wrote down for him the names of the 77 leaders and elders of Sukkah. And Gideon went to the men of Sukkah and said, "Here are Zebah and Zalmunna, about whom you taunted me, saying, 'Are the hands of Zebah and Zalmunna already in your possession, that we should give bread to your weary men?'" Then he took the elders of the city, and using the thorns and briars of the wilderness, he disciplined the men of Sukkah. He also pulled down the tower of Penuel and killed the men of the city. Next, Gideon asked Zebah and Zalmunna, "What kind of men did you kill at Tabor?" "Men like you," they answered, "each one resembling the son of a king." "They were my brothers," Gideon replied, "the sons of my mother. As surely as the Lord lives, if you had let them live, I would not kill you." So he said to Jether, his firstborn, "Get up and kill them." But the young man did not draw his sword, he was fearful because he was still a youth. Then Zebah and Zalmunna said, "Get up and kill us yourself, for as the man is, so is his strength." So Gideon got up and killed Zebah and Zalmunna, and he took the crescent ornaments from the necks of their camels. Then the Israelites said to Gideon, "Rule over us, you and your son and grandson, for you have saved us from the hand of Midian." But Gideon replied, "I will not rule over you, nor will my son. The Lord shall rule over you." Then he added, "Let me make a request of you, that each of you give me an earring from his plunder." For the enemies had gold earrings because they were Ishmaelites. "We will give them gladly," they replied. So they spread out a garment, and each man threw an earring from his plunder onto it. The weight of the gold earrings he had requested was 1,700 shekels, in addition to the crescent ornaments, the pendants, the purple garments of the kings of Midian, and the chains from the necks of their camels. From all this Gideon made an ephod, which he placed in Ophrah, his hometown. But soon all Israel prostituted themselves by worshipping it there, and it became a snare to Gideon and his household. In this way Midian was subdued before the Israelites and did not raise its head again. So the land had rest for 40 years in the days of Gideon, and he, Jerubbaal son of Joash, returned home and settled down. Gideon had 70 sons of his own, since he had many wives. His concubine, who dwelt in Shechem, also bore him a son, and he named him Abimelech. Later, Gideon son of Joash died at a ripe old age and was buried in the tomb of his father Joash in Ophrah of the Abizrites. And as soon as Gideon was dead, the Israelites turned and prostituted themselves with the Baals, and they set up Baal-berith as their god. The Israelites failed to remember the Lord their God who had delivered them from the hands of all their enemies on every side. They did not show kindness to the house of Jerubbaal, that is, Gideon, for all the good things he had done for Israel. Luke 5 verses 1-16. On one occasion, while Jesus was standing by the lake of Gennesaret with the crowd pressing in on him to hear the word of God, he saw two boats at the edge of the lake. The fishermen had left them and were washing their nets. Jesus got into the boat belonging to Simon and asked him to put out a little from shore. And sitting down, he taught the people from the boat. When Jesus had finished speaking, he said to Simon, "Put out into deep water and let down your nets for a catch." "Master," Simon replied, "we have worked hard all night without catching anything. But because you say so, I will let down the nets." When they had done so, they caught such a large number of fish that their nets began to tear. So they signaled to their partners in the other boat to come and help them, and they came and filled both boats so full that they began to sink. When Simon Peter saw this, he fell at Jesus' knees. "Go away from me, Lord," he said, "for I am a sinful man." For he and his companions were astonished at the catch of fish they had taken, and so were his partners James and John, the sons of Zebedee. "Do not be afraid," Jesus said to Simon. "From now on you will catch men." And when they had brought their boats ashore, they left everything and followed him. While Jesus was in one of the towns, a man came along who was covered with leprosy. When he saw Jesus, he fell face down and begged him, "Lord, if you are willing, you can make me clean." Jesus reached out his hand and touched the man. "I am willing," he said. "Be clean." And immediately the leprosy left him. "Do not tell anyone," Jesus instructed him. "But go, show yourself to the priest and present the offering Moses prescribed for your cleansing, as a testimony to them." But the news about Jesus spread all the more, and great crowds came to hear him and to be healed of their sicknesses. Yet he frequently withdrew to the wilderness to pray.